0645. The radar screen on the escort carrier Fanshawe Bay blipped. The radar officer frowned, adjusted the frequency. Another blip. Bright dots appeared in the northwest corner. 1 dot, 2 dots, 10 dots, 20 dots. A whole corner of the screen was covered in signals. The officer jumped up, ran to the bridge, reported to Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague. Sprague grabbed his binoculars, looked toward the horizon. Thin morning mist covered Leyte Gulf. Then he saw it, a mast. A towering mast slowly emerging from the mist. Then a second, a third, a fourth. Massive masts. Gigantic, unmistakable battleships. Sprague lowered his binoculars. His face went pale. His hands gripped the railing tight. The lead ship. He recognized it immediately. Yamato. 72,000 tons of steel. The largest, most powerful ship humanity had ever built. 460 millimeters main guns. Shells weighing 460 kilograms. Range of 42 kilometers. One shell could tear apart any ship in his formation. Behind Yamato Nagato, Kongo, Haruna, 4 battleships. Then came the heavy cruisers Chikuma Chokai Haguro Kumano Suzuya Tone. 6 of them. 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers, total 23 warships, heading straight for TAFFY 3. Sprague has 6 escort carriers. Ships built in a hurry from merchant hulls. V-shells so thin the sailors called them tinderboxes. 3 destroyers Johnston Hole Heerman. 4 destroyer escorts Dennis John C. Butler Raymond. Samuel B. Roberts. 13 ships, none with armor thick enough to withstand heavy caliber shells. Largest guns 127 millimeters. The kind of gun that even if it hit Yamato would be like throwing stones at a fortress wall. Range 17 nautical miles. Closing fast, Sprague understood what had happened. Last night, Admiral Halsey's 3rd Fleet was lured north to chase a Japanese decoy carrier force. The San Bernardino Strait was left open. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita led the entire central force of the Imperial Japanese Navy through the strait in the night. No one stopped them. No one knew. Now, between the 23 most powerful remaining warships of Japan and 165000 American troops landing on Leyte, there were only the 13 small ships of TAFFY 3. And that was just the beginning. On the bridge of Yamato, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita raised his binoculars, looked toward the enemy, nodded with satisfaction. Before his eyes, a group of carriers, flat decks, distinctive structures. Behind them were escorts that looked like cruisers. Kurita had no doubts. He believed this was Halsey's 3rd Fleet. Fleet carriers, heavy cruisers, perhaps even battleships hiding in the mist. The target he was tasked to destroy. He ordered general attack. Signal flags shot up the Yamato's mast. The entire fleet shifted into pursuit formation. Heavy cruisers accelerated. Boilers pushed to maximum power. The distance closed at breakneck speed, 0658. Yamato's main guns opened fire. 9 460 millimeters guns roared in unison. The sound was like rolling thunder. Shockwaves depressed the surface of the sea around the hull. The massive shells screamed across the sky. Crashed into the sea. Geysers of water tens of meters high stood erect around the TAFFY 3 formation. Sprague issued immediate orders. The escort carriers turned east, ran at maximum speed. Planes on deck were launched urgently. Artificial smoke screens were laid covering the sea behind them. But the top speed of an escort carrier, 17 knots. The speed of a Japanese heavy cruiser, 35 knots. The gap was closing, inevitable. It was only a matter of time. And at that moment, a man on the destroyer Johnston made a decision that changed everything. USS Johnston. Commander Ernest E. Evans stood on the bridge, 36 years old. A Native American of the Cherokee and Creek tribes. Small stature, sharp, cold eyes. A year ago, when Johnston was commissioned, Evans told the crew, "This is a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." No one got off. Now, Evans watched the massive columns of water exploding around the formation, watched the carriers trying to run in vain. He made a decision. He didn't call Sprague for permission. He didn't consult his officers. He simply gave the order, flank speed, turn toward the enemy fleet. The navigation officer looked at him, thought he heard wrong. Turning toward the enemy meant charging straight into 23 warships, 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers. Johnston was just a 2,050-ton destroyer with 127mm guns and 10 torpedoes. Her hull was so thin that heavy shells could pass through from one side to the other without exploding. Evans repeated the order, his voice calm as if commanding a drill. Johnston turned, broke formation, accelerated to 35 knots. The tiny ship charged straight toward the Japanese fleet, alone. On the other ships of Taffy, 3 sailors stood along the rails, gaped as Johnston charged in. Some thought the captain had lost his mind. Some thought it was a suicide run. But Evans knew exactly what he was doing. He needed to buy time. Every minute Johnston drew enemy fire was another minute the carriers had to run. 0700. Johnston got close enough. The 127mm guns were in range. Evans ordered fire. 5 guns on the ship fired in unison. Target the heavy cruiser Kumano, leading the Japanese fleet's left flank. The 127mm shells couldn't penetrate Kumano's thick armor, but Evans wasn't aiming for the armor. He aimed for the superstructure. The bridge, the secondary batteries, anything not plated in steel. Johnston's gunners fired with extreme precision. 10 minutes. Johnston landed at least 45 hits with 127mm shells on Kumano. Rangefinders shattered. Antennas snapped. The bridge damaged. Kumano was forced to slow down. The pursuit formation began to fall into disorder. Then Johnston fired torpedoes. 10 marked, 15 torpedoes sped toward Kumano. 9 missed or were intercepted. The 10th hit the bow. Exploded. It tore a massive hole in the hull. Kumano lost all maneuverability, listed to one side, forced to leave the battle formation. A heavy cruiser taken out of the fight by a tiny destroyer. But the price Johnston had to pay came very quickly. The main guns of the battleship Congo swung toward Johnston. The first salvo fell into the sea, tens of meters from the hull. The second salvo fell closer. The third salvo hit. 3 356mm shells slammed into Johnston's hull almost simultaneously. The explosion tore apart the stern, destroyed the aft engine room, killed many sailors working inside. The number 2 boiler room caught fire. Hot steam sprayed out. Many were severely burned. Immediately after, 3 203mm shells from a heavy cruiser hit the superstructure. The aft director was blown away. A shell exploded right next to the main bridge. Shrapnel flew everywhere. Evans was standing on the bridge when the shell hit. Shrapnel sliced off 2 fingers on his left hand, tore his shirt, inflicted multiple wounds on his body. The executive officer fell right next to him, hit in the chest by shrapnel. Blood flowed across the bridge deck. Evans refused first aid. He hastily wrapped his injured hand in a piece of cloth, continued to command. Johnston lost half its engine power. Speed dropped to 17 knots, 3 guns destroyed. But the ship was still afloat, and Evans had no intention of stopping. He ordered Johnston to hide in the smoke screen, maneuver to avoid fire, repair what could be repaired. The 2 remaining operational guns continued to fire at the enemy. On Yamato, Kurita watched with confusion. The small ship that had just charged his fleet, battered to pieces, yet continued to fight. That was not how a normal destroyer behaved. Could it actually be a light cruiser? Or a new type of ship? Kurita's confusion was only just beginning. Rear Admiral Sprague watched Johnston charge the Japanese fleet. Battered, still continued to fight. He understood Evans' intent immediately. He ordered small boys, destroyers, execute torpedo attack. USS Hull, commanded by Commander Leon Kinberger, turned toward the Japanese fleet. USS Heermann, commanded by Commander Amos Hathaway, also broke formation, accelerated and charged in. 2 tiny destroyers. Total weight, less than 4,500 tons. Advancing toward 23 warships with a total weight of over 2,000 tons. This was not a tactic. This was the action of men who knew they were going to die but decided to fight anyway. Hull charged toward the battleship Congo, firing guns continuously while closing in to launch torpedoes. Congo and her escorts focused their fire on the tiny ship. Shells of all calibers rained down. Hull was hit again and again. Each shell ripped away a part of the hull. But Kinberger did not stop. He took the ship to a range of 9,000 yards, fired all torpedoes toward the battleship. Congo was forced to make a hard turn to avoid them. The pursuit formation was thrown into disarray once again. Heermann targeted the heavy cruiser formation. The ship charged straight into the middle of the enemy formation, firing guns off both sides, forcing the Japanese ships to maneuver to avoid collision. In the smoke and chaos, the cruiser Chikuma almost collided with Haguro. Both ships had to slow down, steer away, losing the momentum of the pursuit. On Yamato, Kurita grew increasingly confused. Those small ships should have fled or surrendered, but they kept charging in, one after another. This behavior did not make sense for ordinary destroyers. Could they actually be light cruisers, heavy cruisers, and the carriers behind them? They were too small to be fleet carriers, but if not, why were there so many planes? Was Halsey returning? Kurita had no answer, and the climax was only just beginning. Sprague's next order was even crazier. He ordered the 4 destroyer escorts to join the attack. Destroyer escorts, ships designed to fight submarines, not to fight surface ships, smaller than regular destroyers, only 1,350 tons, 2 127mm guns, 3 torpedo tubes, hulls so thin that heavy shells could pass through without triggering their detonators. Samuel B. Roberts, commanded by Commander Robert Copeland, was the first to charge in. Copeland knew well his ship had no chance of survival. Before attacking, he announced over the ship's intercom, "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." Roberts headed toward the heavy cruiser Chokai, firing guns continuously. The range closed to 4,000 yards, then 3,000, then 2,500. Chokai fired back. 203mm shells hit Roberts time and time again, but the tiny ship kept moving forward. Range 2,500 yards. Roberts fired 3 torpedoes. One hit Chokai, exploded at the stern, destroyed the steering system. The 13,000-ton heavy cruiser began to steam in circles, completely out of control. But Roberts was torn apart by shell fire. A 356mm shell from a battleship pierced the engine room, killing many sailors. Another hit the magazine. Massive explosion. The ship began to sink, but the crew continued to fire until the last gun was destroyed. Dennis, John C. Butler, and Raymond also charged in, firing guns, launching torpedoes at any Japanese ship in range. Kurita's heavy cruiser formation was now in total chaos. The ships maneuvered to avoid torpedoes from every direction, no longer coordinating with each other. In the thick smoke, the Japanese cruisers could not distinguish friend from foe. At one point, 2 heavy cruisers nearly crashed into each other while maneuvering to dodge torpedoes. Kurita's command and control system collapsed completely, but the battle was far from over. While the destroyers sacrificed themselves, planes from TAFFY 3 and neighboring TAFFY units also joined the fight. The problem: most planes were equipped to fight submarines and support landings, not to fight heavy warships. Attack aircraft carried small anti-submarine bombs, not strong enough to penetrate warship armor. Fighters had only machine guns. Some didn't even carry weapons because they were launched so hurriedly, but the pilots did everything they could. Those without bombs dove onto the Japanese ships, strafing with machine guns, forcing the gun crews to take cover. Those out of ammo continued to make dummy runs, creating psychological pressure. Some pilots flew back and forth over the Japanese ships for hours without weapons, just to distract the enemy. Those with bombs focused on critical targets. One group of planes attacked the cruiser Suzuya, hit the torpedo tubes. Japanese torpedoes exploded in the tubes. Massive fire. The crew was forced to abandon ship. Another group hit Chikuma, destroyed the fire control system. The heavy cruiser lost the ability to aim accurately, became an easy target. On Yamato, Kurita received continuous reports of air attacks from all directions. Staff officers couldn't count how many aircraft were operating. The number seemed too large to come from just a few small escort carriers. There had to be fleet carriers somewhere nearby. There had to be. And at that moment, Huil and Johnston fell. 0830. USS Hull finally ran out of strength to resist. The ship had taken over 40 hits from shells of all calibers. Engine room destroyed, boiler room on fire. Only one gun remaining operational. Hintberger ordered abandon ship. The crew jumped into the sea while the Japanese ships continued to fire. Hull sank slowly. Bow down first. 253 sailors killed or missing, including Kintberger. Johnston was also in critical condition. The ship had been battered to pieces over nearly 2 hours of fighting. The stern was almost severed. Only one gun working operated manually because the electrical system had failed. But Evans still hadn't stopped. He maneuvered Johnston into the middle of the enemy formation one more time, firing at any target in range. The dying ship continued to draw enemy fire. Buying time for the other ships, 0910. A salvo of shells from a Japanese destroyer hit Johnston, destroyed the last gun. The ship lost all combat capability. Evans ordered abandon ship. The crew began to jump into the sea. Evans was one of the last to leave the ship. Some survivors recounted seeing him standing on the deck, his injured hand still wrapped in cloth. Watching the sinking ship, Evans was never found. He went missing along with 185 shipmates on Johnston. A strange detail was noted by many survivors as Johnston sank a Japanese destroyer, passed by the group of sailors floating in the sea. The Japanese captain stood on the bridge, looked down at the Americans struggling in the water, then raised his hand in a naval salute, a gesture of respect for an enemy who had fought bravely. But the battle was still not over. The escort carriers could not escape. Gambier Bay, the slowest ship, in the position closest to the enemy, became the first target. Cruiser Chikuma, though damaged, still pursued and fired on Gambier Bay, 203 millimeters. Shells punched through the thin hull of the escort carrier like paper. The engine room was hit. The ship lost power. Fuel bunkers caught fire. The magazine exploded. Gambier Bay listed, capsized, sank into the sea. 130 sailors died. Samuel B. Roberts was also in its final moments. The tiny ship had fought like a warrior, defeated the heavy cruiser Chokai, but now it was sinking. The last gun kept firing until the water reached the barrel. The crew abandoned ship. 89 killed. After the war, Samuel B. Roberts was called the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. And then, the unthinkable happened. 0915. Kurita stood on the bridge of Yamato, trying to grasp the situation, but the situation was an undecipherable mess. Kumano was taken out of the fight right at the start, limping toward the west. Suzuya was burning. The crew had abandoned ship. Chokai had lost control. Circling in the middle of the sea, Chikuma was heavily damaged, speed reduced by half. 4 out of 6 heavy cruisers were eliminated or severely damaged. The battleships and remaining ships were intact, but the formation was completely broken. Ships were scattered everywhere, maneuvering to avoid torpedoes and planes. No longer coordinating. Regrouping the formation would take hours. Reports from ships' enemy aircraft attacking from all directions. The number of aircraft seemed excessive. Rumors of more carriers approaching from the north. Halsey might be returning. Kurita hadn't slept in 72 hours. 2 days ago, the cruiser Atago, his flagship, was sunk by an American submarine. He had to swim in cold water for hours before being rescued. Since then, he hadn't had a full sleep. Now he had to make the most important decision of his life. Push forward. Attack the Leyte landing beaches 40 miles away. Destroy the 165,000 American troops who had no warship protection. Or retreat. Preserve what was left of the fleet. If he pushed forward, he might meet Halsey's third fleet returning. With the formation broken, lacking heavy cruiser protection, the battleships would be sitting ducks for American planes. The entire fleet could be destroyed. If he retreated, he would bring 4 battleships and the bulk of the force back to base. The fleet would still have combat power for future battles. Kurita looked out at the sea filled with smoke and wreckage. He made his decision. Retreat. Reassemble formation and withdraw to the north. The staff officers were stunned. Only 40 miles more. The target was right before their eyes. But the order had been given 0920. The Japanese fleet began to turn. The massive battleships slowly left the waters of Samar, leaving behind sinking American ships and sailors drifting in the sea. When the smoke cleared, the full picture emerged. TAFFY 3 lost 5 of 7 escort vessels. Johnston sank. Hull sank. Samuel B. Roberts sank. Heerman and Dennis were heavily damaged. Gambier Bay sank. 1161 sailors killed or missing. 913 wounded. On the Japanese side, 3 heavy cruisers sunk. Suzuya Chokai Chikuma. Kumano, heavily damaged, had to return to base. Many other ships damaged, but more important than the numbers 165000 American troops on the beaches of Leyte were saved. If Kurita had continued to press on, nothing could have stopped the battleships from shelling the landing beaches. Tens of thousands could have died. When news of the battle spread, Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, wrote in his report, "The success of TAFFY 3 was nothing less than a special grace from Almighty God." Commander Ernest Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest honor of the U.S. military. He became the first Native American in U.S. Navy history to receive this honor. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty in the face of overwhelming enemy odds." Commander Robert Copeland of Samuel B. Roberts was awarded the Navy Cross. Commander Leon Kintberger of Howell was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. Decades later, historians still debate Kurita's decision. Why did he retreat when victory was within reach? Some say he was so exhausted he lost the ability to assess the situation accurately. Some say he was deceived by the ferocious bravery of TAFFY 3, believing he was facing a much larger force than in reality. Kurita himself never fully explained. In post-war interviews, he only said, "I did what I thought was right at the time." Perhaps the answer is much simpler. Kurita was a professional naval officer. He knew the value of the ships under his command. He didn't want to sacrifice the entire fleet for an uncertain victory. And when faced with enemies willing to die to stop him, he chose to preserve his force. But whatever the reason, one thing is undeniable. The 13 small ships of TAFFY 3 with guns that couldn't penetrate enemy armor stopped the most powerful remaining fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy. They fought with everything they had, and when out of ammo, they continued to fight. The battle off Samar became one of the most lopsided confrontations in naval history, and it was decided not by technology or numbers, but by men willing to rush into death to protect their shipmates. That is the story of Johnston Bull Samuel B. Roberts. That is the story of Evans Kintberger Copeland. That is the story of 2 hours and 30 minutes of madness that changed history.